watch. So we looked at your service lens. So service lens is basically when you want to monitor the availability, or rather, if you want to monitor the performance, the metrics, and the availability of your applications, we can make use of your service lens. Sorry. And then we have your canaries, right? So canaries can be used when you want to monitor the availability of your applications, right? So at any point, instead of customers coming and telling what is the status of the application, whether the application is accessible or not, instead of doing that, we can make use of your canaries, which will help you to monitor your application. So that would essentially do the same thing as a customer, right? So it would try to hit that URL continuously, and then if it does not get a response, it would shoot out an email notification telling that, hey, I'm not, users are not able to access this, and that would kind of help you understand whether your application is available or not. So that's where we wrapped up with your uh, CloudWatch, right? Then we started off with your S3, right? So S3 can be S3 is one of your service that you have. So S3 is your it stands for simple storage service. Okay, so it is one of your it's another storage option that we have in your AWS. So so S3, it's your object based storage. So yesterday we also discussed a bit about your EBS and instance store. So EBS and instance store, these are your block based storage, and we also took saw an understanding of what is your block based storage. So once again, block based is basically a storage option where you can store the data as well as you can install applications on them. And then S3 is an object based storage. So we can use S3 to only store the data. We won't be able to install any applications on them, right? So examples includes your Google Drive, for example, right? So that's your object based storage where you can store any kind of data you want. However, you won't be able to install any applications on them. So your S3 also works at the same level. So we can use that to store any kind of data. So common use cases for this includes your log files, any automation scripts you want to keep, any backup files you want to keep. You can store that in your S3 bucket. Okay. And then we also looked at how you can create your S3 buckets. There are some specific naming conventions that you will have to follow in order to create your S3 buckets. So we looked at that. And technically, there's no limitation on the amount of data that you can store on an S3 bucket. So it's like unlimited. You can store any amount of data you want and any number of objects. So objects are nothing but your data. So each data that you upload to the S3 bucket, we refer them to as objects, right? However, individual objects can be a maximum of 5 terabytes. Now you can have any number of 5 terabytes. That's totally fine. But the maximum each object can be is 5 terabytes. Okay, and that's where we had stopped. So, any questions? Let me know.
No, Ravi, it's clear. It's
All right. So let me share my screen. So we'll continue from there. The next thing I want to talk about is your storage classes. So this S3, it provides you different storage classes for different use cases. So depending on your requirement, you can choose which storage class you want. Now the whole point of this is to manage your cost. All right. So to reduce your cost. Now let's say, for example, your sorry, you access the data maybe only once a week or only once a month, right? So you have different storage option available for that, which will help you to reduce the overall cost of your storage. All right, so you have standard FA. So FA here, it stands for frequently accessed. Standard IA, which is your infrequently accessed. One zone infrequently accessed, intelligent tiering, glacier archive, and then RRS. These are the options that you have. Now, by default, whenever you upload your data to the S3 bucket, whatever the data. So yesterday we uploaded a couple of files, the index.html file and then the error.html file, right? So by default, whatever the data that you store in the S3 bucket, it goes to your standard, which is your first option. This one, standard frequently accessed. Now you go with standard frequently accessed when you are going to access the data very frequently, like maybe multiple times in a day, right? Like, that is, you want the data to be highly available, and you will be accessing this data at any point. Then you can go with your standard frequently accessed, where the data is very highly available for you. And by default, that's the storage. So even if you don't select anything, by default, your data will be stored in the standard frequently accessed. Then we have standard infrequently accessed. Now you can go with this option when you're accessing the data very infrequently, maybe once in a week or once in 2 weeks, very infrequent access of the data. Then you can go with the standard infrequently accessed. Then you have the one zone infrequently accessed. Now by default, under your standard, to make your data highly available, your Amazon AWS stores your data in multiple availability zones. Now, what are availability zones? Availability zones are nothing but your data centers. Okay. So by default, in the when I say standard, and this is stored in my North Virginia, right? Now, under this, I will have availability zones. Okay, so in North Virginia, we have 6 availability zones. So by default, what happens is whenever I upload some data to this bucket, AWS will replicate that data in multiple availability zones to make the data highly available. Now, again, there's a charge for that because your data is getting replicated. Now, if you don't want that, you want to reduce the cost a bit, then you can go with this one zone infrequently accessed, where the data will be stored in only one availability zone. And again, you will be accessing the data very infrequently. So, something like once in a week or once in 2 weeks, then you can go with your one zone infrequently accessed. The other option you have is your intelligent tiering. Now, intelligent tiering is kind of a tool which will automatically move your data between the standard frequently accessed and standard infrequently accessed. So if you're accessing the data, it will move to standard frequently accessed. And if you're not accessing the data, it will automatically move to your standard infrequently accessed. That way, again, it will help you to manage your cost. Then you have your Glacier. Now Glacier can be used whenever you want to back up your data for long term, like for you want to back up the data. Maybe let's say you won't be using it for the next 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. So whenever you want to back up the data, you can go with your Glacier, and then you have a Glacier Archive. So we'll be talking about this more later on. And then you have your RRS. Now RRS, it stands for Reduced Redundancy Storage. Now under this is the cheapest storage you have. However, under this there is no guarantee about the availability of your data. So you can use this option whenever you want to store any non-critical data or any easily reproducible data. All right, so any data that you can easily reproduce, that kind of data you can store in your RRS, which will be cheaper for you to in terms of cost. So, like I said, by default, your data gets stored in the standard frequently accessed. Now, if you want to change the storage class, you can do that at the object level. So let's say for this object, I want to change your storage class. So here you should be able to see the storage class. You can edit this, and here you can choose, right? So you want to use intelligent tiering or standard infrequently accessed or one zone, Glacier instant retrieval, Glacier flexible retrieval, Glacier deep archive, and then RRS. Now, under the free tier, only this is available. If we choose any other option, we will be charged for this. Questions?
No, Ravi.
All right. So, like I said, your S3, it's your object level storage, right? So, all the data that we store in the S3 bucket, we call them as objects. And we can use this S3 to store the data or any files, but we cannot install any applications on them. So, examples, your Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud, then what else you have? You have this Meta. So, there are different options that are available, which works in a similar way. So we can use this to store any kind of data you want, but we cannot install applications on them.
Robbie, can we modify it on online itself if we store any data on this S3
It does not have a
option to
edit
modify?
capability. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't do that. Okay, the data we can't edit it. You will have to do it like on a local machine or on some server, and then you'll have to push it over here.
Okay, sure.
This is just a storage purpose tool. We cannot modify the data or we cannot edit the data from here.
So there's no read and write option in this, right? So
Yeah,
whenever we
there's no
need, we have to
right option.
download it and we have to modify, and when we need to re-upload.
Yep. At least for now, there's no such option. Maybe in the future they might introduce it, but as of now, we don't have such option.
Sure.
Okay, so talking about your data consistency, read after write for puts of new objects. Now, if you're uploading any new data to your S3 bucket, you can immediately read the data. The data will be available for read only purpose. However, if you are going to overwrite any data or if you're going to delete any data, it gives you a eventual consistency. Meaning, let's say I modify some data, it may not be available immediately simply because AWS stores your data in multiple availability zones, right? So whatever the modification you're doing, it needs to be replicated in all the availability zones. So that's your eventual consistency. So eventually, you should be able to see the modified data. However, if you're talking about real time, it will hardly take like few milliseconds or hardly a second to replicate that. But let's say, if your application runs on a millisecond kind of a thing, then you may see that impact. If not, you shouldn't really worry about it. But that's the whole point of it. It's your eventual consistency where your data will be replicated in all the availability zones, right? So here's we have some of the differences between your SA standard, standard IA, one zone IA, and then Amazon Glacier. So durability, all of them gives 99.1199999. So this is also known as 11 nines. That's your durability. So that's close to 100%, right? Availability. So SA standard gives you 99.99 percentage availability of your data. So SA standard IA gives you 99.9 percentage. One zone IA gives you 99.5 percentage, and Glacier it's not available, meaning this is your readily available data. So Amazon Glacier, your data is not readily available. You'll have to retrieve that data. We'll talk about that in some time. But this is your availability, and this is your SLA, which is your service level agreement. So Amazon, has this agreement SLA that if you're going with SA standard, 99.9 percentage of the time your data will be available. No matter at what time you're trying to access the data, 99.9 percentage of the time your data will be available. SA standard IA 99 percentage, one zone IA 99 percentage, Amazon Glacier it's not available. So meaning it's not readily available, you'll have to retrieve the data. Availability zones. So here SA standard minimum your data will be stored in 3 availability zones. Here also minimum 3 availability zones, one zone in only one availability zone, and then Amazon Glacier again minimum 3 availability zones for the high availability purpose. Now, minimum capacity charge per object, your cost. S3 standard there's no minimum charge. So if you have like 1 byte of data, you'll pay only for that 1 byte. But for SA standard IA and one zone IA, minimum you will have to pay is 128 KB. So even if you have 1 byte of data, you'll have to pay that minimum cost, which is of 128 KB. And again, under Glacier, there's no such minimum cost. Minimum storage duration charge. So how long you're going to store that data. So SA standard, again, there's no such cost. But with your SA standard IA and one zone IA, minimum is 30 days. So even if you're storing the data for, let's say, 1 day, you'll have to pay that 30 days cost minimum. And then for Amazon Glacier, it is 90 days. Retrieval fees, SA standard, there's no retrieval fee because the data is readily available. But SA standard IA, one zone IA, and Amazon Glacier, you'll have to pay based on the GB of data that you're retrieving. So 1 GB, 2 GB, 3 GB, based on that, you will be paid. First byte latency. So here, like I said, you will see milliseconds latency. But with an Amazon Glacier, it may take few minutes. or few hours to retrieve the data. And all of these are object level storage, and all of this supports your lifecycle transition. So we will be talking about your lifecycle transitions later on. Questions?
No, Ravi, clear.
All right. Now, the next thing we are going to talk about is your properties. All right. So this S3 bucket has different properties. So the first thing we have is a bucket overview. Now, bucket overview here you can see details like your in which region you have this bucket created. What is the ARN? So ARN, it stands for Amazon Resource Names. So every resource that you will create in AWS, all right, has an resource name associated with that. Okay, so this is an ARN associated with this S3 bucket. And then when this bucket was created, all this information will be available for you, right? Then you have this bucket versioning. Now, any idea what is versioning?
Is it, upgrading the storage versions?
No.
Kind of.
Any idea about Git and GitHub?
GitHub.
Yeah.
No, not much. Deep.
Okay. So Git and GitHub, it's your version control tool. It's your source code management tool, basically. Okay. So now, what the whole point of your version control tool is to maintain different versions of your code. Now, S3 also supports your versioning, which is basically maintaining different versions of your code. Now, by default, okay, if you see here this particular file, so let me open up that file here. So here I have this file, right? Now this is the same file that I have uploaded here. Now, let's say I will modify this data. So let me add one more line to this and I'll save this. Now, by default, if I upload the same file, if I upload the same file, what will happen is by default, your S3 bucket will overwrite the data. So the old data will be lost. So you can see this is 93 bytes and it will overwrite that with your new data by default. Now, let's say I don't want that to happen. I want to maintain the old data as well as the new data. That's where I can go with your bucket versioning, which will help you to maintain multiple copies of your data. Make sense?
So it's not default. It will not make an replica of original file. So every time we have
Correct.
to
By default,
update the bucket version.
not every time, it's a one-time thing. Once you enable it, so let's say I'll edit this and I'll enable this and save this. Now bucket versioning is enabled. Now
Okay.
let's say I will modify this data and let me upload this once again, the same file. Now again, here it is showing you only one file and you can see this one now it shows 140 bytes. But if you see here, you see this show versions. When you click on this, it will show you the versions. Now you see there are two files. This is the old file, so you can see when this was modified, and this is 93 bytes, and this was modified at 1028, and this is 140 bytes. So now I have both the versions. So I have the older version and also I have the latest version. By default, it will always show you the latest version. Like this, if you want to maintain multiple versions of your data, you can make use of your bucket version. Make sense?
Yes, Ravi.
But one thing you'll have to keep in mind here is your cost. Now, because you're maintaining multiple copies of the same data, that will increase the cost, right? So you'll have to be a little careful with that. Now, under the free tier, you can store up to 5 GB of data in your S3 buckets. Okay, so you can have up to 5 GB total. If you go above 5 GB, that is where you will start getting charged. Okay, so that's your bucket
Uh,
version. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Ravi, is it 5 TB or 5 GB?
No, no. 5 TB is for each object.
Okay.
5 GB is, I'm talking about your free tier limitation. So that, so we have this account called free tier account where some
Mhm.
of the resources are free to use and some of the resources are chargeable. Okay.
Okay.
So under the free tier, AWS is telling that you can store up to 5 GB of data. I'm not going to charge you for that. But if you store above 5 GB, I will start charging you for whatever the additional storage you are utilizing.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So that's basically, the total storage size that you're talking about. We are not talking about the limitation of each object, but we are talking about the free tier limitation.
Okay.
Then we have your tags. Now, what are tags? Tags are nothing but your metadata. So any additional information you want to provide for this bucket, something like, let's say, what is the purpose of this bucket? So let's say we will call this as demo bucket. Then let's say for each environment you have this. Let's say this is for your dev environment. Then let's say which customer this is for, right? So let's say demo customers. So like this, any additional information. So likewise, let's say for which project you have created this bucket. So let's say XYZ project. Like this, any additional information that you want to provide about your S3 buckets, you can make use of this tags. Questions?
No, Ravi, it's clear.
Then you have this encryption. Now, by default, whatever the data that you're storing in the S3 bucket, it is unencrypted. It is not encrypted. It's your unencrypted data. But if you want to add additional layer of security, if you want to encrypt your data, we can make use of your encryption. Now, for the encryption, it provides us two options. One, we can go with S3 provided encryption keys, or we can go with this service called KMS. So KMS, it stands for uh, Key Management Service.
Key
We will be,
management services.
yeah, so we will be talking about this service later on. So you'll get these two options. So you can edit this and then you can enable. So here you can see you have the server side encryption with Amazon S3. So this will be your S3 provided keys. Or you can go with this KMS, server side encryption with Key Management Service. Or you have this additional option called dual layer server side encryption. So this is a new option that they've introduced, right? So we will, I mean, any options you want, you can go with this. You can enable it. So here S3 will take care of generating the encryption keys and encrypting the data. With this, you will have to create the encryption keys and use that. So we'll be talking about this later on. But for now, let's say we will go with this and we will enable this and save changes. Now, whatever the data you will be uploading to the S3 bucket, it will be encrypted. All right, it will not be available in the plain text. So if you're like transferring this data online from, let's say, over the network, the data will be encrypted for you. Questions?
Um, so if the file is encrypted, if I'm trying to download, or if a third party, I mean, if third user is trying to download it, whether the downloaded file will be in the encrypted format or in the original format.
It will be in the original format. So the whole point of this encryption is if someone, let's say, tries to access this data over a network, like let's say someone is trying to hack this and read this data, it won't be available for them in plain text. But if you download this to your local machine, it will be available in plain text.
So there's no any option like we can encrypt it by password in this AWS.
Not in AWS, but something like that will be an additional logic you'll have to add in your application. um, but it does not, there's no ready to use option in S3 that we can use for that.
Okay, okay.
All right, and here this is your intelligent tiering, so one of the storage class that you have. So if you want to utilize this, you can create a configuration for that. So you can give a name to this, And then what is the scope? So is this applicable to specific objects or all the objects? So let's say all the objects, and we'll enable this. And here you can define the rule. So archive the access tier. So when enabled, intelligent tiering will automatically move objects that have not been accessed for a minimum of 90 days. So any data that has not been accessed for a minimum of 90 days, move it automatically to this archive access tier. So minimum is 90 days here, but however, let's say you want to go with 180 days or 365 days, you can specify that. Okay, so it can be anywhere between 90 to 730 days. Then you have this deep archive. So this is one option you have. The other option you have is this one. So when enabled, again, intelligent tiering will automatically move objects that haven't been accessed for a minimum of 180 days. So this one will be 180 to 730 days. The difference would be in your cost. All right. So you know this will be a little cheaper for you, or rather, this will be a little cheaper for you compared to this. Okay. So that's your intelligent tiering. Questions?
Yeah, Ravi. Actually, this intelligent tier of archiving. So this kind of configuration can be used for email, right? Email or any other notification. I mean, mail services or SMS services where after 90 days, this is not required, so it will go under archive. So there will be separate storage, or it will be stored in the same 5 GB available data.
Um, okay. See. Okay. Let me be a little more clear with that. Um,
Okay.
let's say okay. Let's talk about an antivirus application. Well, let's say you're
Mhm.
trying to install an antivirus application on your system, right? Now, whenever it's a new application you get a free trial, right? Like
Yeah.
30 days or 7 days or something like that. Now, you can use that and you don't have to pay any money for it, right? But let's say after the 30 days, you want to use that, you'll have to pay money to use that, correct?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's a limitation that is set. You can still use that application, but there's a limitation. Likewise, AWS also has this free usage that is set for your account. Okay. So the free usage
Okay.
limitation is 5 GB of storage capacity. So AWS is telling that you can store up to 5 GB. I'm not going to charge you. You store up to 5 GB every month. So next month again it will reset to zero, and it will look for that 1 month what is the storage capacity. So if it is up to 5 GB, AWS is not going to charge you for anything. But if it is above 5 GB, AWS will start charging. So is this clear?
No. So my doubt is whether this archive folder will be in the 5 GB data itself.
Okay, so yeah, this will be total capacity of your storage. So
Yeah.
this will be part of your 5 GB. Yes. If you're talking about
Okay.
the free tier, then yes. But
Okay. And
when you're talking about real time, you'll always
mhm.
go with the paid account, so you don't really have to worry about all those things. But yeah, I mean, this is part of your storage cost. You will be paying money for this.
Okay. And this 90 days criteria which you have mentioned in this intelligent there
Mhm.
configuration, right?
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Um, I have little doubt in this. So it- there are like two criteria, like 90 days and 180 days. 180 days is paid one, right? And 90 days is a free tier.
No, both are paid. Okay. This one is if you have not access to, let's say you have this index.html file in your S3 bucket and
Mhm.
you don't access it for 90 days, or no one uses that data for 90 days. So my intelligent archive tiering will move that to this archive option automatically.
Okay.
and this one will be 180 days. So any data, so let's say again this index.html file, you haven't accessed it for 180 days. So intelligent tiering will automatically move it to this deep archive access tier.
Okay, the first one will I mean it will give a time for 90 days and it will move it, and second one is like a 180 days.
Correct. So this is minimum is 90 days and this is minimum is 180 days.
Okay. Yeah, clear. Okay.
All right. Then you have your server access logging. Now, server access logging can be used. Let's say, for example, you're sharing this bucket with multiple people. So let's say you're accessing this bucket, I'm accessing this bucket, Prokshit is accessing, Bharat is accessing. By default, S3 does not maintain any logs as to who accessed an object, when the object was updated, when the object was deleted. It will not maintain that. It will not capture those logs. But if you want to capture those logs, we can make use of the server access log. So you can edit this and you can enable this and you can choose where you want to store the logs. So if you have like multiple buckets, you can choose in which bucket you want to store the logs. But in our case, we'll go with this existing bucket itself and choose path and save changes. Now, what will happen is any operations that you will do in this S3 bucket, like let's say uploading a new object. So let's say, uh, so let's say this one. Okay. So any objects that you will upload or any operations that you will do in the S3 bucket, S3 will maintain a log for that. So you give it some time, but here a new folder gets created, which will start maintaining all the logs. So, you know, you access this object, you modify this object, you delete this object, any operations you will do, S3 will start capturing the logs for that. So this can be used for your monitoring purpose. So maybe sometimes, let's say you want to know as to what your users are doing or what is happening with your S3 bucket, what all operations people are doing in your S3 bucket. We can make use of this server access logging. Make sense?
Yes. Is it like it's similar to the SharePoint in OneDrive? So whenever we modify or access the folder, so in the file our name will be present like it was updated by Sedu or updated by Prokshit, right? Like that.
Not exactly the name, but
Hmm.
more of a server details from which server this operation happened, from which IP address this server
Okay.
happened, and what HTTP method they used, what time it was done, which date it was done. All that information will be available.
So it will capture this IP address, server IP address,
Yeah.
where
Yeah. So
phone
more
method
of
has been done.
server details is what will be captured here.
Okay, that's clear. Okay.
Okay. And then you have this cloud trial data event. So in AWS, we have this another service called Cloud Trial. We will be talking about this later on. But for now, this is an auditing tool. So if you want to capture your data events in the Cloud Trial, we can configure that as well. So server access logging is one option you have. And then you also have this Cloud Trial that can be used. So here you'll be creating a trial and then where do you want to store this? Again, you can choose in which bucket you want to store all these logs. And let me give it a name. So let's say test. I don't want to now just because we will be talking about this later on. So next, now what all data do you want to capture? So you want to capture the management events, so management operations performed on your AWS resources, or you want to capture data events, so log the resource operations performed on or within a resource, and then you have this insight events, so identify unusual activity errors or user behavior in your account. And then you want to capture the read activity or only write activity, and then choose the source of data events to log. So I want to capture this S3. So which data event do you want to monitor? So I want to monitor S3. And what do you want to monitor? So log all events or read only events, write only events. You can also customize it. So let's say all the events, and then this is your JSON view, okay, as to what's going to happen. This will be your insight events. Now this is additional charge. You'll have to pay money for this. I'm just going to disable this for now. And then next, you get to review everything and then click on create trial. So now what will happen is, again, this one will be at the account level. So, to your earlier question as to, Prokshit access state or Sedu access state or Bharat access state, that kind of information will be stored in this cloud trial. Which user
Okay.
did it, what operations they did it, all that information will be stored in this cloud trial data events. This will be more from a server, okay, from which server the operations is happening, and this is which user is doing it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Then you also have this event notifications. Again, let's say you're sharing this bucket with multiple people, and then you want to monitor this such that if there's a specific operation, for example, let's say someone deletes some data or someone uploads new data, you want to get notified. You can make use of this event notification. So you can create event notification, and then you can give it a name. Also have the option of monitoring specific objects. Like let's say I want to monitor only this index.html file. So whenever something happens with this file only, I can give a prefix or a suffix to that. And then what events type do you want to monitor? So put, which is for upload, copy, which is copy, when there's an object deleted, when there's an object restored, when there's a tag created, all these options are available. So let's say all object create events. So whenever an object is created or when an object is deleted, I want to monitor, right? So, and there are other options as well. And then your destination. So you want to trigger some Lambda function, or you want to simply send out a notification. Okay, and then click on save changes. And what this will do is, there's an error for this. I'll be talking about this later on, but ideally for this, we have to create a topic which has necessary permissions. In this case, there's no necessary permissions. This SNS topic that you see, it does not have the necessary permissions. So we'll talk about this later on. But now any of these operations will happen, it will trigger a notification for me. So I'll be informed whenever an operation happens in this S3 bucket. That's your event notifications. Clear?
Yes, sir.
This is another option. You have Amazon Event Bridge. So this is part of your CloudWatch. So you can enable this, and then send notifications to Event Bridge for all events in this bucket. So any events. In the other option, in the previous option, we were able to choose which event I want to send out the notifications, and this will be for all the events. So this is additional capabilities, and it's a new option that they've introduced, Event Bridge. We can utilize that. This is also kind of sending out notifications, but this will be for all the events. Then you have the transfer acceleration. So this can be used if you're transferring the data from one region to another region, or from one availability zone to another availability zone. So AWS by default takes their own sweet time to do the transfer. But if you want to speed up that process, you can go with this transfer acceleration. So you can edit this and you can enable this. Okay, and there's an endpoint that gets created. Now the advantage of this is that whatever the new data, or you want to share some data, AWS will give the high priority for that. So they will try to do that in a much faster manner, so they'll take less time for that. However, you will have to pay extra money for that. So this transfer acceleration, this will incur additional fee, but it will help you with a faster data transfers. Questions?
No, Ravi.
Then we have object lock. Now, object lock can be used whenever you want to avoid any accidental deletion of your data. So this provides you with a write once, read many model. So let's say here I have this data, it's a very critical data, and I want to avoid accidental deletion of this data. I can go with this object lock option. All right. Now, as of now, S3 currently does not support enabling object lock after a bucket has been created. So by default, once after the bucket is created, I cannot enable the object lock. But however, if you want it, you can reach out to the customer support and they will do it for you. If not, when you are creating the S3 bucket, the first time when you're creating the S3 bucket, you have the option of doing an object lock. So you can enable this. So what this will do is permanently allows objects in this bucket to be locked. Object lock configuration is required in bucket details after bucket creation to protect objects in this bucket from being deleted or overwritten. So if you want to avoid deletion of your objects or overwriting of your objects, we can make use of this object lock. Questions?
No, Ravi. It's clear.
Then you have this requester pace. Now requester pace is a feature wherein now let's say again I am sharing this bucket with all of you guys, right? Now let's say you guys start using this, and for whatever the operation be charged for that. So let's say you're uploading some data, you're modifying some data, whatever you are doing, I will have to pay money for that. Now let's say I don't want to do that because you are using the data. I want you to pay the money, though it is my data, but you are using it, so I'm not going to pay for that. I want you to pay for that. So that's where we can go with this requester pays. So anyone who is requesting for the data, they will have to pay the money for this. That's where we can enable this requester pays. Okay, so requester will pay for request and data transfer, while requester pays is enabled. Anonymous access to this bucket is disabled, meaning only when I give access to this bucket, people will be able to access this bucket. If not, they won't be able to access this. So it will be more restricted. And the last option we have is static website hosting. Now, S3 bucket can also be used to host a static website. So any idea what is a static website?
No, Ravi.
Okay, so blogs are generally your static websites. Okay, so any blog websites, any application that is only read only application, we won't be able to interact with the application. All right, that's your static website. Now S3 supports enabling static website. So if you want to like kind of have a static website hosting, like let's say you want to write some blog posts, we can make use of your static websites for that. So here you can enable this. So you can edit this, enable this, and you want to host a traffic website or you want to redirect this to an object. So we want to host it. Here you can give your index document. So let's say index.html and then your error document. So basically the objects that you have stored in your bucket. So you have to make sure that the objects are stored. So this is my index document and this is my error document. You have the option of doing a redirection as well, but we're not looking at that. And then click on save changes. And what this will do is this will create one URL. So now all you have to do is share this URL with your users. Let's say you are my user, I will share this. And you can start accessing that. So when I click on this, now by default, I will get this access denied error because whatever the object that we have stored in the bucket, okay, by default, it is private. Okay. you won't have the access. So you can see this block all public access. So by default, all the public access is denied. So for now, I will be talking more on this tomorrow, but for now, I'm just gonna disable this and will confirm this. And so now you can see block all public access is off. And then I'll have to do one more step. So I'll be talking more on this tomorrow. But for now, let me just do this to show you that example.
So by doing this, it can be accessed anyway from the anyone
Yes.
have
So,
this link, right?
yeah. So now if you see, I'm able to access. So this is basically the same data that I have here.
Okay.
So now my data is public. So anyone who has this URL, they can access. So like that's where you can have a blog post, for example. So maybe let's say you have a website where you have something to learn, or people can use that to learn new technology or read some data. You can host that in your S3 bucket. S3 bucket will give you a URL. Just share that URL with your users and they can read that page. And if this index.html file is not available, that's where your error.html file will display. So telling something like, so you can use this like maybe let's say you're updating something and you don't want your users to kind of be affected with that. You can go with this error. So something like this website is under maintenance. Please try again later. So like this, we can make use of your static website hosting. Questions?
No, okay.
All right, so that's about your properties that we have at the bucket level for all the buckets. I'm going to stop here because anyways the guys are not there, so we'll talk more about your permissions tomorrow. Permissions and managements, all these things we will talk tomorrow. All right.
Sure.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow then. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you, Ravi. Yeah.